So welcome everybody to this panel session on remote sensing to assess what works in context affected by fragility, conflict, or violence. I'm Vianney Dequiedt. I'm professor of economics at the Université Clermont, Auvergne, and scientific director of FERDI, Foundation for Studies and Research on International Development. And I'm going to share this panel session. Just to give a brief outline, in areas affected by fragility, conflict, or violence, standard evaluation techniques, techniques that rely heavily on first-hand data collection, are really difficult to implement, and there has been a growing interest among both academics and practitioners in the use of different sources of data, including remote sensing, to obtain a more precise picture of the impact of projects. And such an approach combining satellite and administrative data has been advocated by FERDI for the impact evaluation of external aid in G5 Sahel countries, for instance. So the panelists will discuss the potential and limits of relying on remote sensing data to assess what works for development in a FCV context. The session is organized by FERDI, Foundation for Studies and Research on International Development. And we have two panelists that I'm going to introduce now. Our first panelist is Mathilde Maurel. Mathilde is a directrice de recherche at the French National Center for Scientific Research and a member of the Centre d'économie de la Sorbonne and senior fellow FERDI. Her research interests widely cover development economics, and they include migration in relation to climate change and women's job market participation in the context of developing economies. At FERDI, Mathilde is currently involved in a research program on the economics of rural electrification that focuses on African countries. And this program gathers and exploits remotely sensed data to inform decision makers. So she will share with us her experience in this regard. Our second panelist is Jean-Louis Arcand. Jean-Louis is professor of international economics at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. From 2012 until 2016, Jean-Louis was director of the Center for Finance and Development. He's a founding fellow of the European Development Network, EUDN, and a senior fellow at FERDI. His research focuses on the microeconomics of development with a current focus on impact evaluation and a social program in West Africa and the Maghreb. He has been a consultant to the World Bank, to the FAO, the UNDP, the Gates Foundation, and several national governments. At FERDI, Jean-Louis is currently involved in the Chaire Sahel program, for which he is leading the efforts towards a better evaluation of development projects in the G5 Sahel region. So before giving the floor to our speakers, to our panelists, I would like to say a few introductory words on what motivated FERDI to organize this panel session at the Evidence for Development Conference. So to start, FERDI is a think tank which research-based purpose is to influence the international discussion on major development issues. It is independent and not for profit, and it mobilizes high-level researchers in the field of international development and offers innovative thinking on key issues in global development. FERDI is particularly active on issues related to development effectiveness, sustainable development, and global governance. To illustrate FERDI's activities on allocation policies and the effectiveness of international aid have helped fuel international debates and increase recognition of the vulnerabilities, especially those of the least developed countries. Innovative and policy-relevant sources of data that we are going to discuss during this session are at the heart of FERDI's activities. And the foundation hosts several original platforms and databases. To name a few, for instance, the mining sector tax legislation database that covers 20 African countries over the long run, or the Sustainable Competitiveness Observatory, which makes available an analysis of the relative economic strengths and weaknesses of 54 African countries. In 2018, FERDI created a chair dedicated to the Sahel region and based in Ouagadougou. This chair, the Sahel chair, is innovative because its initiatives and management are Sahelian, and it aims to enlighten the decisions of public and private actors in the region in their action to overcome the Sahel crisis and to promote sustainable development in the region. Tertius Zongo, who is a former Prime Minister of Burkina Faso and Senior Fellow at FERDI, is the director of the chair in Ouagadougou, and he leads the team of African experts mobilized by the chair. The chair's first work aimed to examine the data available to Sahelian decision makers to help define their public policies. In particular, data relating to external financial flows are of prime importance, especially as the Sahel countries' economies are highly dependent on these flows. However, the examination of data collected by the Sahel Chair with the support of the country's administrations revealed that too often they were incomplete or were unreliable. So several workshops with representatives of the governments of the G5 Sahel countries have led the Sahel Chair to focus its work on strengthening the capacity of states to have reliable databases and a common platform for better monitoring. This initial work conducted by the Sahel Chair has also highlighted problems in the implementation of development projects and programs in the G5 Sahel countries. And in particular, the analysis of the impact of development projects is hampered by the difficulty to measure the impact, particularly in the most fragile areas of those countries, where it is often very difficult to travel. So this difficulty motivated the Sahel Chair to develop an evaluation method adapted to specific context based on the cross-referencing of geolocalized data with field data, which is still possible to collect thanks to local correspondence. So this method will be at the heart of Jean-Louis Arcand's talk in this panel session. Also, as stressed by the Sahel Chair and various other actors interested in the Sahel region, electrification is one of the prominent challenges faced by the G5 Sahel countries. To illustrate, the electrification rate in all the G5 Sahel countries is around 20% and twice lower than the average for sub-Saharan Africa countries and 4 times lower than the world average. So the sector remains largely characterized by the absence of competition and a very limited production, unable to meet demand. So improving public electricity services requires an efficient management of the sector in order to reduce losses, to improve the financial health of operators, and to encourage private sector investment. Innovation is also a key factor in the development of the electricity sector, and innovative solutions must be found to lower the cost of new energies, improve network efficiencies, increase the competitiveness of the operators, and digitize infrastructures and decentralized services. So FERDI contributes to the debate on those projects to extend access to electricity, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, through research that focuses both on the identification of decentralized electrification projects and on analyzing their impact on economic development and poverty reduction. To sustain decentralized electrification, high-quality impact evaluation is needed because developers and financiers need visibility of the most appropriate solutions and also visibility on the expected impacts. And this evaluation must be cost-effective, and it can exploit innovative sources of remote sensing data. And this will be at the heart of Mathilde Maurel's talk in this panel session. So as panel chair, I have already talked too much, and I'm now going to let our panelists share with us their experience of remote sensing to assess what works in contexts affected by fragility, conflict, or violence. So Mathilde, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Vianney. Can I ask Ramona to share yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Vianney, for this very kind introduction. And yes, I am very, very glad today to present a part of the research which is conducted under the name of Access to Electricity, Climate, Sustainable Energy and Development, and which is about the use of remote sensing in the assessment of electrification projects in developing context. So this project is realized under the supervision of my colleague Jean-Claude Berthelemy, who is Professor Emerit at Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne and also Senior Research Fellow at FERDI. So I would like to thank you, the FERDI and the GDN conference for giving us the opportunity of expressing our opinions and sharing our experience on this use of remote sensing for the assessment of electrification, off-grid electrification projects, more specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. The access to electricity is a very important issue. It's a key issue. SDG, the seventh one, access to modern energy. It's important in itself, but it is also important as a driving factor for achieving significant progress in the other goals like education, health, security, etc. 650 million people will still not have access to electricity in 2030. And 9 out of 10 of these people will be in sub-Saharan Africa, mostly in rural and remote villages. For the International Energy Agency, most of the new electricity access in rural sub-Saharan Africa will be based upon off-grid equipment. But at the same time, these kind of projects are under-evaluated, and this is, of course, very damaging. Why are they under-evaluated? The obvious reason is because of the shortage of funds, and also there is a sort of trade-off between the cost of the evaluation and the size of those projects. They are indeed very, very small. But there is a need for such an evaluation because those projects are quite risky. About half of them fail in the 3 to 5 years after they're setting up, which implies a waste of invested resources. The projects that turn out to be successful are extremely successful. With the rate of local income growth is very impressive. It's a 2-digit rate. So we have risky projects, but at the same time, projects that have an extraordinary potential for rapid and strong growth. So the question is, how can we attract funding? And we believe with the FERDI that what is key is to provide scientific evaluation, but cheap evaluation, and scientific evaluation based on robust evidence and able to give undisputable best practices. So next slide, please. So we started. So our objective is therefore to address this lack of systematic scientific evaluations, and for that purpose, we are going to use remote sensing analysis. But first, I would like to take a few words about the history of this program, and this program started in 2016 with the launch of the COSMA. COSMA means collaborative smart mapping of mini-grid action. COSMA is a metabase. It's a collection of all academic studies, publications, official reports, working papers that have in common to be based upon quantitative analysis. That is, we have statistics like mean, standard errors, p-values, etc., and we can run a so-called meta-analysis, which means that we are able to. This is like a preliminary work. We are able to, according to disentangle, a sort of profile of the profile according to the academic to the quantitative literature profile of a successful project. What meta variables, what factors explain the success and failure of the mini-grid projects? The answer has several dimensions. The paper the working paper whose reference is on this slide by Jean-Claude Barthélémy and Arnaud Millien, they emphasize several dimensions. They show that initial conditions matter, the choice of the right technical solutions, also the business model that is implemented has to be sustainable, and also the location. There are locations that are more favorable. Also the institutional framework. Also this aspect of the question is not investigated. I mean, it's an aspect of this question that we want to investigate further, and which requires further research and efforts, analytical efforts. So what I'm going to present today is the second step of our research program. During this second step, we want to proceed further and to elaborate a methodology, which is this methodology I mentioned before, scientific, to assess, based upon remote sensing analysis, to assess the impact of a project. The criteria, the key criteria are the price. It must be cheap. And you will see that it's beyond this cost, which is the low cost. We can replicate the analysis at every moment. Robust, reliable, scientific, and which can be repeated without any additional cost as often as one may want. Next slide, please. So let me show you present you the intuitions which is behind our methodology approach. First, so remote sensing, we use the NTL, nighttime lights, which is considered in the literature as an excellent proxy for economic activity, but at a more aggregate level, regional or national. And we believe that, and I think we provide strong evidence that those NTLs are also a very good proxy at the level of a few pixels, 3 square kilometers, sorry. So at a very small local level. We extract from our COSMA database, we extract 50 projects that fit a certain criteria. First, we focus on small projects with moderate NTL because we believe that our methodology is best appropriate for this size of the projects. Then we restrict our attention to projects that are well localized, so we have their GPS coordinates, and also we know precisely the date of implementation of those projects. Then we distinguish 5 groups of countries, 5 groups of villages of projects, depending on the quality of the NTL data. So for the first 2 groups of cases, the quality of NTL is relatively high. The values are significantly positive, and also we can distinguish before the project, which is represented on the graph as the vertical green bar. So we can identify before the green bar a trend. This trend is continued after the project has started, and this is our counterfactual. So we compute the deviation of the deviation of the red dots from this fitted line, which is the counterfactual, and we consider that if this deviation is significantly positive, then the project has been successful. And on the slide, you see on the left an example of failure because the reality, the NTL are below what would have been what they would have been in the absence of the project. And on the right, you have an example of something which is successful. Next slide, please. Then we have next slide. Yeah, thank you very much. Then we have 2 other groups of cases. The NTL here differ from the previous cases in that there is no trend. So the values are positive, significant and positive, but the fitted line is flat, so there is no trend before the introduction of the setting up of the project. And we face 2 situations. One is a situation of success on the left. There is a clear departure, which is persisting over time, a clear departure from the counterfactual, while on the right-hand side, we don't see anything. We don't see anything which is significant. So this is a failure. Next slide, please. And this is the last group of cases, and probably the most interesting. There is no trend. We cannot distinguish any trend in the NTL before the projects. Moreover, the quality of NTL is very poor, and actually one cannot detect any NTL which can be attributed to human activities. So the NTL for this 5th group of countries is below is set equal to a threshold, and we have to make some technical assumptions to construct our counterfactual. Those technical assumptions are provided in the working paper, and I am not going I'm not going to enter into the details, but we try to minimize the bias which could be induced by this the nature of the data. So these cases are very, very interesting because they correspond to villages which are in a complete darkness before the introduction of the project, complete dark, which correspond to situations of energy traps, of poverty traps, and those are situations which are extremely common in the context we are we are interested in, context of development. And also, those cases constitute the bulk of our sample. 22 out of the 50 projects are in that situation of very poor initial conditions. So this echoes the rate of success of mini-grid projects, which is low. I mean, half, 50%, which I mentioned in my introduction. And I think that we really, researchers, but also policymakers, need to pay a very particular attention to those cases, those villages. Next slide, please. The next. Okay, so this is the summary of in three graphs. Three graphs, the summary of our research. So the first blue bars display the distribution of the probabilities of success of our projects. And so overall, 44% of the projects are successful over the short run, a little bit more over the medium run, with a probability of 80%. We clearly see that there are two modes in that distribution, which correspond to what I described previously. That is, we have the first four groups, where the probability of success on the left of the second graph in green and orange. So where the probability of success is much higher, close to 70%, while for the poorest group of villages, this probability drops to 14%, 3 out of 22 villages. The last one of the exercise we run in our paper is extremely interesting. We use the paper whose reference is provided, Illuminating Economic Growth, and so this is a paper that gives us the elasticity of NTL to GDP. It's about 2.5 for developing countries, which is exactly our case. So we are able to compute the equivalent of the increase in NTL in terms of GDP and of GDP growth. The case which is represented on the right side of this slide is the median country. We see that its income, sorry, not the median country, the median case, the median project, its income doubles within 10 years. This is a very impressive growth, but again, as economists of development, we are very familiar with this kind of economic transformation, process of economic transformation. We know that it happens, and this echoes many examples of takeoffs in emerging countries at a more aggregated level. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting case because it illustrates the advantage of our methodology as compared to others. This is a project which has been assessed in a study. So it's a project which is described in our COSMA database, and this is it was implemented in Philippines. The project has been installed in 1999 and evaluated 10 years later. For the authors of the study, this project is considered as a success, as successful. So indeed, it is evaluated in 2010. Indeed, when you look at the NTL in 2010, we see that the NTL in 2010 is indeed the highest amongst the others, and all NTL, it's the highest, And it is indeed significantly higher than, positive and significantly higher than, so according to our methodology, this year would be qualified as successful. But if we consider the whole sequence of NTL, that is the gross, I mean, that is the deviation computed over the 3 years or even the longer time span, then we are not able anymore to conclude that this project has been successful. So this is one of the great advantage of our methodology. I mean, of this methodology, which is based on remote sensing, we can repeat the evaluation without any additional cost as long as we want, and we are able to provide some assessment, assessments which nicely complement the other qualifications. Next slide, please. So in the last step, we end up with 30. So we end up with 30 outcomes. Our project, 50 projects has been. We end up with 50 outcomes. Sorry, our 50 projects have been successful or they have failed, and we want to check that our conclusions are correlated with plausible explanatory variables. And those explanatory variables are the initial energy demand supply profile in the chosen locality. We check that the initial conditions also, which proxied by the initial level of NTL matter. The size of the project, if the project is oversized, it's more likely to fail. The remoteness or distance to the closest agglomeration, and also finally the institutional framework, which for which we lack we lack. There is a lack of evidence, and we think it's really a topic which deserves further attention. It's beyond the scope of this analysis, but of our analysis. But we are really convinced that this institutional the institutional environment, the governance, the how to implement a community climate of trust and cooperation. So this is this would be one of the question that we want to really on which we want to pay more attention. Next slide, please. So our conclusions are manifold. This program allows us to draw the following conclusions. First, remote sensing, NTL, proved to be a very efficient tool for tracking the impact of mini-grids, so on economic activity. Moreover, satellite imagery, remote sensing, NTL is easy and free. And I repeat, I insist, sorry, but it can be repeated over time. It can be replicated as often as we want. Of course, in the context of scarcity of financial resources, this is an asset. We observe that successful mini-grid projects have a very substantial effect on local economic growth and economic transformation. Of course, they can fail, and they fail very half of the time. But this should induce policymakers to pay really more attention to this kind of project. At this stage, our contribution is about tracking, quantifying the mini-grid induced electrification-induced increase in NTL, but we have other objectives. And so, as I said, we want to identify the good practices along several dimensions, institutional and technical, so institutions, and what are the the best solutions according to each particular situation. And also, there is one aspect that I didn't mention yet, but which is an entire avenue of research, which is the issue of causality. Because of course, we do not take into account we are just quantifying NTL-induced project-induced increase in NTL. So this is one step, but we have really to tackle the issue of causality running from a project and its consequences on the economic growth, economic transformation. I would like now to finish my presentation by saying a few words about our partners. And
please, like very quickly, Mathilde, because we are running out of time.
Okay, so CLEBIER, the African Association for Rural Electrification, they give us access to the mapping of projects in many countries, 36, but we focus on a subsample of countries. ISF for the evaluation of their project Café Lumière. And also the last word, but it's very important, I would like to thank the FERDI, of course, but also the ADEME, the Agency for Ecological Transition. It's our main funding partner. So I take the opportunity of this presentation for thanking them warmly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mathilde, for this insightful talk. And Jean-Louis, the floor is yours.
Okay, let me be. How much time do we have left? Vianney, you're the boss here.
Well, 22 minutes for the session.
Okay, but we want to leave a little bit of time for floor questions. Okay, so let me be brief in this. Anyway, so I can still remember today when I first saw noticed the publication of this paper by Vern Henderson and Storygard and David Weil in the American Economic in 2012. And so this was this famous paper which started, in some sense, the sudden awareness of economists for remote sensing data and for nighttime lights. And sort of everyone was, at least everyone, the geeks that I used to hang out with, or still hang out with actually, were all saying, you see economic growth from outer space. It sort of seemed like an episode from Star Trek. And so at the time I was working on the evaluation of one of the largest social programs in Africa, in North Africa, a thing called the Initiative Nationale de Développement Humain, so the National Human Development Initiative in Morocco. And we just finished doing surveys, and we'd spent like $500,000 collecting data, and it's beautiful data. And I live for panel data. And so we saw this paper and we said, hey, why don't we see if we can do a report on this program? It was a nice RDD, regression discontinuity design identification strategy. Let's see if we can see this program from space. And so we were sort of kidding, right? We're talking this over in Rabat. And so we went and got the VIRS data, all the satellite data on nighttime luminosity for Morocco, aggregated it up with the shape files for the Moroccan administrative units that we're looking at. And lo and behold, with an RDD identification strategy, we picked up an 8% increase in luminosity over a 6-year period that could be attributed to this this program. So when you sort of see that, and this is not such a bad idea. This is a long time ago, so this is I think we did the paper back in 2013. Anyway, so that's sort of when I got interested in this stuff and realized as a development economist who enjoys working in some fairly unsavory places where most people don't want to go, that this would be particularly useful in situations of fragility, where quite often you have traditional types of data, but those data are quite often incomplete, and they may be sporadic. And so the idea here is to not be more Catholic than the Pope, but to attempt to combine different sources of data in order to try to figure out what's going on in the field. And so, very specifically, in the context of the Chaire Sahel of FERDI, for the past year and a half, we've been working on the G5 countries. So this is Mauritania, Mali, Burkina, Niger, and Chad, and more specifically on Burkina Faso, simply because the Chaire is based in Ouagadougou. And what we've been doing is essentially looking at the link between, right now, one paper is completed. You can download it off the FERDI website. It's in French. Apologies for those who don't speak the langue de Molière, but my co-author, the guy who's actually responsible for the paper, is Burkinabe, as anyone working with the Chaire Sahel should be, not Burkinabe, but from the country itself. So what we're looking at in this paper is basically the link between development projects, and it's sort of a nice example of how you can merge all sorts of different types of data and hopefully say something plausibly causal about the links between these development projects and various types of outcome. And so the paper in particular, so we're using the standard aid data. So this is, georeferenced aid data. I mean, people have been doing this for a while now. I mean, the good people at the University of Maryland. We have data for these 5 countries on a little bit more than 1,000 projects in a whole bunch of different sectors. Of course, as those of you who work with the aid data know, that unfortunately there's a cutoff in the data, and we don't have a good update, unfortunately, but hopefully that'll be coming soon. So the data basically covered 1995 to 2014. And so then what we did is we merged this all in with a whole bunch of other types of data from various types of household surveys, DHSs, you name it. And what we were particularly excited to be able to do was to merge this in with nighttime luminosity data for these countries. Now, of course, there's all sorts of problems with nighttime luminosity data. You're going to have bleeding from cells to different cells. The pixel size. In the most recent data, pixel size is actually getting really, really interesting. The pixel size is down to basically 500 by 500 meters. But when you get down to that small level of resolution, very detailed resolution, what you quite often get is you do get sort of a bleeding of light from one pixel into another. So you have to be careful in terms of how you interpret the data. And so what we've been able to do, therefore, is to apply pretty much sort of standard econometric techniques. Basically, grid cell fixed effects, dynamic panel models, the horrible Arellano and Bond type things, and probably the most interesting stuff is stuff that we've done using panel fixed effects quantile regressions, which combine all of these sources of information, and we find links, small links. Again, this summarizes a very long paper, but we find small links between the presence of aid projects, so their lag presence of aid projects instrumented in various different manners, and nighttime luminosity. So there seems to be a certain amount of link between nighttime, between aid projects and nighttime luminosity, therefore, in terms of economic activity. But the effects are relatively small, and they tend to be concentrated down at the lower levels of the distribution of nighttime luminosity. And plus, as you would exactly expect, there's a lot of spatial spillovers. Let me emphasize, this is one of the things which is really interesting about nighttime luminosity data, is that it allows you, if you're not familiar with it already, to get heavily involved in all of the spatial econometrics literature, because obviously spatial effects are going to be extremely important. And this is something which has been brought up. There's this paper which has been circulating for a year now, on the standard errors of persistence. The fact that spatial correlation, there's a whole bunch of really famous papers out there. Well, if you don't take into account spatial correlation properly, you basically can get the same result by regressing spatial noise on spatial noise. It's a guy out of Ireland who the name escapes me now. Maybe my two colleagues will remember what's his name. It's called, anyway, the title of the paper is Standard Errors of Persistence. So that's the first point I wanted to make. So the second thing that we're doing now, Lamy Sabaro is my co-author on that, and he's sort of the lead on this. The other thing that we're doing in the context of the Chaire Sahel now is to link all of this also to the conflict data. So right now we're in a preliminary phase, and the conflict data that we're using are the conflict data that everyone knows, you know, the Accolade Rio stuff, which also suffers from some pretty serious limitations in terms first of you know, what is covered in terms of conflict, the size of the grid, which is fairly coarse, and the time coverage. But there also, we're linking this in with various sources of data, including the nighttime luminosity data. And there are also, by the way, also vegetation maps, because vegetation maps, when you want to look at the evolution of economic activity, especially when you're dealing with agricultural areas, vegetation maps, which you can also pull off the remote sensing, the various, you know, NASA. Most of these data obviously are American. There's also data which are European, and this is another source of which has been less explored in the literature by economists. Nighttime luminosity sort of seems to be the darling right now, but vegetation is quite interesting as well. It's actually something that in a completely different project we're exploring with UNCTAD in the context of what's going on in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Finally, the other thing that you can do here is that you can link in. So our colleagues, again, putting very much sort of an interdisciplinary hat on my head, you can link in along with the remote sensing and the conventional data. So say DHS or standard household surveys with the remote sensing data, so vegetation and nighttime lights. You can also link in quite often geographical maps from our friends in epidemiology. So there's an awful lot of data out there that are collected on a regular basis by epidemiologists. I'll give you a concrete example. So again, working on Burkina an awful lot. So we just finished some work on the economic consequences of schistosomiasis, and this is all based river blindness, as some of you may know it. Bilharzia is another traditional name. And again, this is also linked to economic activity, and one of the ways in which one can quantify the impact of schisto on economic activity is through its impact on nighttime luminosity, something that we've done for Burkina. Anyway, so that's just a brief aperçu of the sorts of work that can be done. There's a fixed cost in terms of entering this field. So for the people who are following online, just remember that you'll need a good internet connection to be able to download all of Quantum GIS. It's quite a package, but it's free. And then there's a fixed cost in terms of learning how to use Quantum GIS in terms of manipulating your data. Second, on the other hand, the payoff that you get from that is that you're able to merge all sorts of interesting data together, and you can do it, come on, all on your own, and that's great fun. And then after that, you get the pleasure, and this really is a pleasure of learning all this. I mean, I work in R. And in R, the packages that exist for spatial econometrics are absolutely fantastic, and so it allows you then to get into all of this literature on spatial econometrics, where you basically it adds an extra dimension to your data, right? You have individuals, you have time periods, and you have space. And space, as someone back in 1905 once put it, is just another dimension along with time, and so this opens up new horizons in terms of research. And I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Louis, for this very efficient talk. Just to start the discussion, let me ask to both of you two questions. The first is as follows: beyond night lights, so you both discuss night lights data. But what are the most promising remote sensing data types, according to your opinion? So Jean-Louis, you mentioned vegetation maps. Are there other types of remote sensing data that could be useful to evaluate what works? And the second question is about are there some specificities about those remote sensing data that impact how to organize the dialogue between the researcher and the political decision maker, as we do for standard types of data? So I let those two questions to you.
Do you want to start, Jean-Louis? Well, I can start. Okay.
Ladies first.
So ladies first. Yes, thank you. So for the first question, of course, there is a lot of other indicators from remote sensing and satellite from the sky, and but I will not. I mean, make an exhaustive list of all those indicators, but of course there are many, and some of them are much more appropriate for studying, for instance, the question of agricultural productivity. I am more about your second question, Vianney. So how can remote sensing be used for strengthening the dialogue between researchers, and what is the specificity of this remote sensing analysis for the dialogue between researchers and policymakers? First, I would say that it's extremely important to strengthen this dialogue, and remote sensing indeed is one possibility, because it provides us with a very cheap way. It's a very easy tool for assessing the quality. I mean, for assessing the success of the electrification projects, but any other projects and investment. And so I think that remote sensing, in a certain sense, may renew the way policymakers and researchers are speaking to each other. It's also very important for policymakers to support such initiatives. That is, we, for instance, I take the example of remote sensing and very small projects of electrification. So we are very this new methodology is very innovative, and we need to get support from the organizations that finance from which we can expect to get support. So I think this would be my answer to your question.
Jean-Louis, may I add another question coming from the audience to our panel? So what processes do you use for local validation of results? So this is a third question for you, Jean-Louis.
Okay, so other types of things. So when I was touching on the schisto sort of epi maps, again, there's sort of a spectrum in terms of how remote the sensing is. So a typical type of stuff which isn't satellite per se. So recently I was doing some work with the World Bank on COVID in Brazil, and so mobility maps are extremely useful. So this is stuff that you get, that one can get at various levels of aggregation depending upon the connections that you have with our good friends, at Google or Microsoft. You can basically figure out how much movement there is around a country. So that's a type of sort of remote data which is not satellite per se. Remote doesn't necessarily mean satellite. So similarly, you can think of an awful lot of what's being done today by the people in deep learning and in natural language processing as being using remote sensing, because when you're using text as data, also a lot of this stuff is coming from a long way away, and then you have to try to find a way in which you link that up with some sort of GIS system. So there are various gradations of remoteness depending on whether it's an eye in the sky or an ear listening to what's going on, and then there's the way in which the stuff is filtered and used. And some of the stuff like BART, which is this new one of Google's new AI tools, is just remarkable. I've been doing some work on this in computational linguistics. For the political decision makers, in very raw terms, when you're dealing with people who are in like G5 countries where you have terrible things going on in the ground, this has got to be a way for them to feel that they actually know a little bit of what's going on in territories that sometimes have escaped their attention completely simply because of the security situation on the ground for months and months. So at least they have an idea of what's going on. I think that may sound corny, but I think it's important. And the third question, which was the one in terms of validation on the ground, well, sometimes it's actually really, really hard. So give you an example of this. So the stuff that we're doing with people at UNCTAD looking at Palestine. Well, PCBS, which is the Palestinian Statistical Bureau, is incapable. We've been asking for years now, literally for 2 years. They're incapable of giving us data from PECs, which are their household surveys, which are very nice, standard sort of LSMS type household surveys, which are carried out on a regular basis, and we can't get the geographic disaggregation of consumption and income figures. So we can pinpoint down to 500 by 500 pixel, in Ramallah, what the luminosity has been doing over the past 10 years, but we cannot link that to the municipality data or the subsample of the PECs of the household data set. So to make the link with what the actual exchange rate, to put it entre guillemets, in inverted commas, the exchange rate would be. So in terms of validation, there you come up against the standard, the standard problems that one always comes up against in terms of data retention or difficulty in that, or someone lost it, we don't know what the key is anymore. So it doesn't solve that problem, because then when you want to validate, you're still back to good old-fashioned methods, which are as our American friends would put it, boots on the ground.
Thank you. So if you have an additional question, I'm talking to the audience, you can use the chat or the question and answer session on your screen. So on the chat, Jean-Louis, there is a message for you about where the remote sensing data are available, and also as for a link for the GIS package.
So the remote sensing data is all stuff that you can get from the NOAA. So just look up if you noticed in Mathilde's presentation, she had this thing, this working paper by these two guys at the IMF. That's a very nice place to start. So it's basically NASA. So you go to the NOAA, and then for the GIS stuff, just Google quantum GIS. But again, make sure you have a decent internet connection, because it takes ages and ages. It's like 300 megabyte thing, and the connection, even if you have a good connection, it's a free server, and so the download takes forever. Otherwise, you can write me, and you can write me here. Write me at this, and I can send you links. This man here, use this one. This will work.
Okay, so I think we have just 1 minute to conclude this panel session. So I would like to thank both of you for sharing your experience with us on this very exciting topics of using remote sensing data. I would like to get from this session that first, remote sensing data are useful because they are cheap to obtain, and also because they allow for to repeat periodically the evaluations. So this is of project. This is really important, and maybe more basically that they're also useful because they give us some information on regions where it may be very, very difficult to obtain first-hand data from the ground, as Jean-Louis explained, especially in the case of the G5 Sahel countries. So thank you all for participating in this panel session, and I think it's time to end this session. So have a nice day, and bye.
Okay, I think we're offline. Allez, moi je vais devoir, je ne sais pas si on est encore, faut toujours supposer qu'on a un micro ouvert. Ça, il faut toujours supposer.
Ah,
oui, c'est le cas.
Mais moi, je dois vous quitter malheureusement parce que les Ivoiriens ont à peine changé leur réglementation au départ. Et donc, le test Covid que j'avais pour partir demain soir n'est plus valide. Et donc, ils viennent de passer de 5 jours à 3 jours. J'avais mon test fait à Genève vendredi qui allait parfaitement pour mon départ demain soir. Ils l'ont changé. Et donc là, il y a un mec du ministère du Plan qui va faire venir probablement une unité, une brigade mobile de test Covid juste pour me faire le test. C'est un truc comme ça. Les gens sont tellement gentils.
Bon,
les gens sont gentils.
Mais tu n'es pas vacciné,
merci en tout
oui.
cas à tous les deux.
Merci, Vianney, merci.
Allez, ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao.